Imagine two dusty frontier towns at the edge of the known world, where settlers lived by their own law, facing raids, droughts, and empire alike. In 1795, these towns dared to defy the might of the Dutch East India Company, the VOC. The burghers of Graaff-Reinet and Swellendam expelled their colonial officials, raised their own flags, and declared themselves free republics under presidents. These forgotten republics lasted just a few months, yet they sparked an idea that would shape South Africa for generations, the dream of self-rule. By the late 1700s, the VOC, once the most powerful trading empire in the world, was rotting from within. Corruption, overreach, and endless wars had drained its strength. On the far frontier of the Cape Colony, hundreds of kilometres from Cape Town, its grip was slipping. The settlers, the burghers and trekboers, lived hard lives, isolated and self-reliant. They paid heavy taxes, faced constant raids, and received little protection or justice in return. For many on the frontier, the VOC's authority was no longer seen as legitimate, and as revolutions swept across America and France, new ideas reached even this distant land: liberty, equality, and the right to govern oneself. Carried on letters, travellers' tales, and the whispers of passing merchants, these ideals found fertile ground among settlers long accustomed to fending for themselves. To understand the republic that would rise in Graaff-Reinet, we have to go back to the founding of the town itself. It was officially founded in 1786, becoming only the fourth town in the Cape Colony, after Cape Town, Stellenbosch and Swellendam. Its creation was no accident. It was meant as a buffer settlement, the last outpost of VOC control before the vast and dangerous eastern frontier. The town's isolated location forged residents who were hardy, resourceful, and fiercely independent. Its name combined those of Cornelis Jacob van der Graaf, the Dutch governor of the Cape, and his wife, Cornelia Reinet, a polite colonial gesture that lent the settlement a touch of refinement it never really possessed. Despite its lofty name, Graaff-Reinet would soon be defined more by frontier grit than by grace. The settlers themselves were not city men. They were trekboers, semi-nomadic farmers who had drifted eastward from Stellenbosch and Swellendam in search of better grazing lands. Families like the Boertes, Prinsloo's, Ferreira's and Delports spread across the Sunday River Valley, living days' rides apart, trading cattle, and fending for themselves, guided more by the horizon than by any distant authority. By the 1780s, the region's white population numbered only a few hundred, scattered across an area larger than some European kingdoms. The VOC sent a single Landrost, a magistrate, to oversee them. In practice, his power existed mostly on paper, barely extending beyond the town square. Graaff-Reinet itself began as a cluster of whitewashed Cape Dutch buildings around a dusty square beside the Sundays River. At its heart stood the Dutch Reformed Church, first built of mud and thatch, and later replaced in the 1790s by a sturdier stone structure that would witness the town's first stirrings of rebellion. Around the square grew a small parsonage, a courthouse, and a handful of trading houses, fragile symbols of civilization at the edge of the wild. Beyond them stretched the untamed frontier, uncharted, contested, and lawless. To the east lay Xhosa territory, to the north the harsh Karoo wilderness. Here, survival depended on a rifle, a horse, and one's own judgment. Independence wasn't just a political ideal, it was a way of life. By the time the town was 10, its people were already restless. The VOC taxed them heavily, restricted their trade, and offered little protection against raids. Complaints to Cape Town went unanswered, and resentment hardened like the parched earth of the Sundays River Valley. When news arrived that the Dutch Republic had fallen to the French and become the Batavian Republic, the farmers of Graaff-Reinet felt they owed nothing more to a company that no longer ruled. In February 1795, they gathered in the town square. The Landrost, Meunier, tried to restore orders, but the burghers refused his authority. He was told to leave the district. The town, they declared, would govern itself. Today, the Jostdi Hotel stands where the VOC's magistrate once administered justice. In 1795, that authority was rejected outright, as the burghers seized governance for themselves, a bold, fleeting assertion of frontier freedom. A new council of burghers was formed to govern the fledgling republic, led by President Martinus Prinsloo. They swore to uphold law and order, defend their homes, and recognize only God and the people as their masters. President Prinsloo, a respected farmer and community leader, lent authority and legitimacy to the Republican movement. Together, these men forged a government born not of theory but of necessity, a republic shaped by survival, independence, and the harsh realities of frontier life. They wrote to Cape Town announcing that the district of Graaff-Reinet was now a free republic. In their words, they sought not rebellion but justice, to live as free burghers under our own chosen officers. For the first time on the frontier, a community of settlers had expelled the company's officials and claimed sovereignty for themselves. They repaired the old church, raised their own militia, and organised trade with neighbouring districts. From the Sundays River to the Kamdebou Plains, the people now answered only to Graaff-Reinet. At the heart of the town hall would later become a lasting symbol of local governance, a reminder that even in 1795, the burghers possessed the will and skill to organise themselves and rule independently. Murray Street, the main thoroughfare, would have been lined with modest homes, workshops and trading posts, forming the social and economic heart of the young settlement. At the centre of the town stood the Dutch Reformed Church, the spiritual anchor of the community. In 1795, its leaders lent their support to the burghers' claim to self-governance, guiding both faith and civic life. Beyond the town, the vast Kamdebou Plains stretched in every direction, a landscape both breathtaking and unforgiving, where settlers patrolled their farms and defended against raids. Yet the world beyond the frontier was changing fast. Across the seas, the British fleet was already sailing for the Cape, determined to seize it before the French or the Batavians could. The burghers of Graaff-Reinet had declared themselves free, but the empires of Europe were closing in. Despite their newfound independence, life in the town remained harsh. Causa raids were frequent, cattle theft and disputes over grazing lands were constant, and occasional droughts tested the council's authority. The burghers organised local militias, appointing field commandants to maintain order and coordinate defence. Prinsloo presided over meetings where disputes were resolved, taxes for local defence were levied, and resources for patrols were allocated. It was self-rule in its most practical form, law, order, and survival dictated by those who knew the land and lived among its people. The Republic of Graaff-Reinet also reached out diplomatically. Letters were sent to neighbouring districts, and even to the distant Batavian Republic, making clear that the town would recognise any government that respected their independence and protected their rights. By mid-1795, news arrived that the British had occupied the Cape Colony to prevent it from falling under French or Batavian control. The reality of imperial power loomed over the fledgling republic. The town's leaders understood that their independence, however tangible on the plains, might soon be challenged by forces far greater than themselves. Gradually, the Republic's independence began to wane. By the end of 1795, the Republic existed more in principle than in practice. The burghers retained their local council and militias, but ultimate authority had shifted irrevocably to the British. Even so, the memory of those months of self-rule endured, a testament to the frontier spirit and the unyielding desire for autonomy. Just a few months after Graaff-Reinet declared itself a republic, the burghers of Swellendam followed suit. Unlike the remote eastern frontier, Swellendam lay along the fertile Breda River valley, a prosperous farming district and a vital link between Cape Town and the interior. Its location brought both opportunity and frustration. VOC officials were distant enough to neglect local needs, yet close enough to enforce taxes and trade restrictions. In June 1795, the burghers took decisive action. They expelled the VOC Landdrost and established a council of burghers to govern themselves. Their leader, Hermanus Steen, was a respected farmer from the nearby farm Nooitgedacht, practical, devout and widely trusted. Calm under pressure and firm in his principles, Steen inspired confidence among the settlers. His election as president reflected duty rather than ambition, a man chosen to speak for his community. Peter Delpoort, thought to have family ties to Graaff-Reinet's Pietrus Delpoort, brought a sense of continuity between the two republics, showing that the frontier's frustrations and ideals were shared across districts. Delpoort's fiery temperament and eloquence made him a voice that could rally men and articulate their grievances to the world beyond. The old Drostdy, now the site of the Drostdy Museum, had once been the centre of VOC authority. In 1795, that authority was rejected. From this act, a brief but bold republic was born. Across the town, buildings such as the Svellengrebel House and Skuen Ort Country House Hotel stand as reminders of the colonial residences that shaped early Swellendam. Though the structures themselves came later, their sites recall the homes of the burghers who led the frontier community. Faith played a central role in civic life. The Dutch Reformed Church, rebuilt several times since its founding, marked the heart of the community, while St. Luke's Mission Church later reflected the town's expanding religious life. Along what is now Main Street, trade and conversation would have filled the air. Then a dusty frontier road lined with modest homes, workshops and early trading posts, supporting the town's economy. The old post office and restored mill, though later additions, stand today as emblems of Swellendam's enduring connection to its working past. Beyond the town, the surrounding lands shaped the lives of its people. Burghers patrolled and farmed the open country near what would later become Grootvaardenbosch Nature Reserve and Bontebok National Park, landscapes that still capture the rugged independence of the frontier. The town's coat of arms reflects that same sense of pride and autonomy. For a few brief months, Swellendam was governed not by distant officials, but by its own citizens, men determined to uphold justice, faith and local order. As in Graaff-Reinet, letters were sent to neighbouring districts and to the Batavian Republic, asserting their right to self-governance, while hinting at possible recognition if independence was respected. But as the British fleet approached the Cape later that same year, the Republic's freedom came to an end. Together, the republics of Graaff-Reinet under Martinus Prinsloo and Swellendam under Hermanus Steen were the first open declarations of frontier independence in southern Africa. Though their freedom was brief, snuffed out by the return of empire, their defiance left a lasting mark. These burghers, farmers, and frontiersmen had shown that government could arise from necessity, from faith, and from the will of ordinary people to rule themselves. In their short-lived republics lay the first outlines of a frontier identity, independent, self-reliant, and wary of distant authority, a spirit that would shape the great Boer republics of the 19th century and echo through South African history for generations to come.